I got a mass mailing from John Pilger today. The theme was On the Beach, Nevil Shute's novel about the aftermath of a nuclear war that eliminates all life on the Earth. The novel was published in 1957 and made into a movie in 1959 starring Gregory Peck. Pilger claimed that the book came out at a time when everyone else was silent. One of the Aspie traits I display in all its glory is that I tend to be literal. So my first thought was, everyone else was silent, except for Earth Abides by George R. Stewart, 1949. Philip Wiley's 1954 novel Tomorrow, 1959's Alas Babylon by Pat Frank, every movie Paul Peterson ever made, and a lot more novels and sci-fi movies from the 50s than I can remember. And of course, the entire anti-nuclear movement. I bring this up because the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-gun movement, the current climate panic, and a few other popular positions I can think of all share one thing in common. When in danger, when in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. Or to be more precise, panic. Well, folks, the genie's out of the bottle and trying to get it back in would be like trying to push toothpaste back into the tube. The US and the UK began the Manhattan Project to develop the first atomic bomb because Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard sent FDR a letter saying that if the US didn't, Germany would. Ironically, Germany was more interested in building a nuclear power plant because they wanted cheap power. Even more ironically, documents that recently came to light indicate that the Japanese really were working on such a project. Since then, Russia, France, China, India, and Pakistan have joined the nuclear club. And despite a nuclear non-proliferation treaty, North Korea and Iran, two fanatical mischief makers, look like they're about to get into that exclusive club too. So of course, the anti-nuclear crowd is demanding that we do something, such as unilaterally disarm so the fanatics won't see us as a threat, that is, commit suicide, demand we put all nukes under the control of the UN, that is, the Globalist Solution, or some other plan that amounts to what I call the Neville Chamberlain Solution, surrender to Mordor. We as a species, we as the human race, we as the most intelligent and powerful creatures here on the planet need to deal with this problem by connecting to reality, not fantasy. The problem, of course, is that human beings are built to prefer fantasy because it feels better and gives us an illusory feeling of security. But history is clear. Fantasy always fails. During the Cold War era, despite all the fear and panic, there was no atomic war. And ironically, every one of the fantasy solutions would have ended in one. You see, folks, oftentimes the best solutions to problems are counterintuitive. The solutions most people just assume can't work. My favorite example of this comes from modern history. We are taught in the public schools that after the stock market crash of 1929, President Herbert Hoover took no action, which caused the Great Depression. We're also taught that it was the intervention of President Roosevelt that gradually brought us out of that very same decade-long Great Depression. And that is total bullshit. Hoover was a progressive Republican who immediately created a whole spectrum of programs to bring us out of the Depression. In fact, every program FDR created, and that's in quotes, was simply an extension, under a new name, of something Hoover had already created. The Great Depression lasted 10 years and brought misery to people around the world, not just in the US. And in so doing, it contributed to the circumstances that led to the rise of the National Socialist Party in Germany and the fascists in Italy. Despite what we're taught, the proper response to the crash of '29 would have been to do Nothing. If that had been done, the Great Depression would have been over in 1 or 2 years at most. How do we know this? Remember the stock market crash of 1987? No? Perhaps because despite the fact that it was the same order of magnitude in size to the crash of '29, it was over and done with in just 18 months. President Reagan took the correct course of action. While crowds of people were running around panicking and demanding that he do something, he took the only correct course of action. He did nothing. We humans have a tendency to want to see something get done when there are problems. We can even force our leaders into taking action that makes the problem worse, but makes us feel better in the moment. We're wired to be stupid. My point is simple. There was no way to avoid creating atomic weapons, and once they existed, there was only one way to avoid war. Make war at least as destructive to the perpetrator as it would be to the victim. And it's worked. Until now. This is not the first time we've fought a suicidal enemy. The Kamikaze of World War II knowingly flew to their own death. Most of the Kamikaze planes were shot down, yet the few who made it through did so much damage that they kept coming and coming and coming. Now imagine what damage a kamikaze could do with an atomic device sitting in the back of his plane. That, my friends, is our future if we don't do the right thing now. And panicking, screaming, do something, would just make our leaders do the wrong thing. Now, because this problem isn't complex enough, let's add yet another layer of complexity. We are being systematically lied to by people on our own side. People who have a vested interest in keeping the panic alive. People who have their own escape plans to protect themselves if and when the inevitable happens. So does the other side, if that's any consolation. What is it then that we should do? Simple. The only power that could put an end to North Korea's dabbling in ICBMs with atomic warheads is China. So we need to let them know that the alternative to letting North Korea play with dangerous toys would be worse. For China. Okay, how do we do that? This is an old idea, by the way. I first heard of it quite a few years ago, and have seen variations of it work throughout the past few centuries. Our ambassador talks to the Chinese ambassador in private. North Korea's actions are destabilizing the region, our ambassador says. If you can't rein in your puppet and restore balance, then we'll have to. Which means we'll have to offer the Japanese and South Koreans atomic weapons and missiles to deliver them. Of course, that means those missiles could also reach China. We would, of course, hate to do that, but we have those weapons ready to hand over now. To restore balance, of course. Just so you know we're serious. To make this work, we would have to be prepared to hand over the weapons. And we would need to give China a face-saving out. If you call off your dog, our ambassador continues, we'll announce publicly that China and the U.S. have jointly devised a solution to the problem. So China will get credit and gain prestige on the world stage. What if that wasn't enough? We'd include Taiwan and Vietnam in the deal. That would put China's expansion into the South China Sea in jeopardy. The Chinese are strategic thinkers, and ringing them with enemies who could fight back is not in their plans, while appearing to solve a genuine crisis would increase their international stature. There's a similar plan to curb Russia's support of Iran, involving Poland, the Ukraine, and possibly a few other Eastern European countries. Of course, there's an element that would howl with rage if they found out what was going on. They would rather become Sauron's slaves than question the delusional fantasies they believe regarding how the world works. Teddy Roosevelt once said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." That was his way of stating a fact that history has repeatedly proven to be correct. Diplomacy only works when the alternative is worse. It's that simple. Thanks for watching my rant. My goal with these videos is to present to you the world through the eyes of an Aspie. If I have succeeded, remember, the life I would love to become accustomed to is funded by viewers like you. So please like my video, share it, subscribe, leave a comment, remember me in your will, or better yet, send cash.